Okay, anyway, so I'd like to do something that I reminded myself when we were learning this week's Parshas Naso, and the story of, in the Haftorah, the story of Shimshon and how Shimshon is born and everything. But of course, the story stops in chapter 13, chapter Yud Gimel. Reb Yaakov has a discussion about a particular word that appears 3 times by Shimshon. I mean, Shimshon, the whole story of Shimshon is in itself a little bit of an enigma. I mean, it's something that needs a lot of clarification, but we're not going to go into that. Rabbi Yaakov doesn't go into many of the subjects that need to be clarified. Sometimes he does, but this particular one begins where Shimshon comes and he tells his parents he met a girl in Timnah, a Philistine girl, and he says that he wants to take her. The parents should take her for a wife for him. And the mother and father, of course, give him the standard answer. I think this is the only time in Tanach that it appears, but it's the classic answer. There's not enough girls in the Jewish world that you have to go marry out, right? And he says, that's the way I want it. Now, it probably Shimshon understood something his parents didn't understand. They didn't know. They knew him as not Superman, but as Clark Kent. In other words, they didn't realize that he has a whole plan over here on what he's going to do, and he didn't tell them that. He was like sort of the Mossad agent. He worked for himself, or for God, we should say, but not for nobody else. So at one point it says that they went down to Timnah against their will. They went down, meaning he wanted them to meet this girl. And then there was a lion that came out. He killed the lion, and he saw what kind of strength he has. And then in Pasuk Yud, it says like this: Vayered Avihu ela isha vayasham Shimshon mishteh ki ken yasu habachurim. After it says that the parents went down there, on the way down, he fed them from the what do you call it, of the lion, the carcass of the lion. He fed them dvash. He fed them honey, because he found honey in the carcass at a certain point. And then it says, Vayered Avihu ela isha, and his father went down and he made for Shimshon there a mishteh ki ken yasu habachurim. Okay, now it all of a sudden changes to Avihu. Okay, instead of Aviv, Avihu, which appears only 7 times in the whole Tanakh. That instead of the word his father, Aviv, it says Avihu, his father. Okay, now normally we don't get so much into these types of questions like Yirmiyah, Yirmiyahu, Yeshayahu. In Yirmiyahu, it's a number of times it says Yirmiyah, it says Yirmiyahu. Like, we have a Masorah on where to write them, but nobody really gets involved in them. Reb Yaakov seems to take a stab over here, and he tries a couple of different approaches. Now, the different approaches we'll go through. Maybe the last one we'll wait for next week. I don't know. We'll see. But there's 3 or 4 different approaches he has to this. Just so you know that nobody ever discusses anything like this, right? He quotes the Masorah here, and I gave you on page 1 the Masorah, Vayered Avihu, and it says, if you look, the Masorah is in the middle of the page. It looks like, Chinese letters or something between the Targum and the text. You have what's called the Masorah Ketana, and then you have the Masorah Gedola at your side, left side towards the bottom, above the Mitzudat David. Now, very few people study the Masorah, but of course Reb Yaakov did. But here he doesn't really go so much into the Masorah itself. He just says, it says over here Zion, right? It says Vayered Avihu, it says Zion, which means 7 times in the Tanakh. Whenever you have those one letters, it tells you really how many times in Tanakh it appears. So let's see what Reb Yaakov says on page Reish Nun Ches, that's page 2. Yud Daled Pasuk Yud, Vayered Avihu El Yisha. The father, now the mother is not there anymore. She went with him, but all of a sudden the mother disappears and the father's here. Lo yadati madua gam kan gam lekamon pasuk yutes ulekamon tezayin lamed alf kina avihu. There's 3 times here in the story of Shimshon, here and in pasuk yutes. It also says, Vayal Beis Avihu. After he kills the Philistines, he says he got angry. Vayal Beis Avihu. He went up to the house of his father. Okay, and then there's another time, the last pasuk actually about Shimshon, when he already dies. It says over there that they came to take his body and bring it back to Israel and bury the body in Israel. So it says over there, chapter Tetzayin, Pasuk Lamed Aleph, Vayerdu Echav v'chol beis Avihu. His brothers went down in the whole house of his father. Vayisu, so they carried him. Vayalu v'yikbro so ben Saro ben Ishta'ol, bekever manoach aviv, for who Shafat Yisrael. His father, it seems, already had passed away at this time. Don't forget, he was a shofet for 20 years. Father had passed away. And they buried him, which, I mean, we have a place where we call the Kever of Shimshon, not too far from that big department store. What do you call the big department store on the way to Beit Shemesh?
IKEA.
IKEA. So if you make a right turn by IKEA and you travel another 10 minutes, I think you'll get to the Kever. And that's near Eshtaol and Sarah.
I'm happy to take you guys.
What?
I'm happy to take you guys.
Okay, great. Okay.
Shiur Tiul.
It's a great tiul, no?
Oh yeah. They have psukim all the way along up the trail.
Oh my God,
that's not a kever miyuchas.
Yeah, it's a kever. Nobody knows for sure, but it's a kever miyuchas. But it is in the right place, at least. Rav and Abaya are in at Pekudat Safon. What were they doing in the Pekudat Safon? I have no idea. Right? So they're not exactly in the right place, right? Essentially, they lived in Chutzlaretz in Bavel. So there, there, but here it's in the right place. There's Sarah ben Eshtaol, But there it also says, right? Vayerdu echav v'chol beis avihu. Okay, so Reb Yaakov, there's 4 other places. Reb Yaakov is going to say that right now. V'nei shtei pamim matzinu shabo achar pol kozeh u'mesora mitzuyan zayin klomar b'chol chaftal tzvarim rak zayin pamim bofen zeh. What? What'd you say?
I was going to ask where are we exactly? What page?
Page Reish Nun Ches. The second page.
Great, thank you.
Okay. V'nei shtei pamim matzinu sheba'u achar pol kazeh. Twice we find that the name of you comes after a poal, a verb that's like it. It looks like it. Ha'echad b'scharia. Udikaruhu avihu v'imo. Okay, his father and mother will stab him. Now, I don't know if you know what that parsha is talking about, but it's a very interesting parsha to learn, because the Meshech Chochmah learns that that's the source of the bittul avodah zarah, that there was a bittul of the yitzrud avodah zarah. He says it's clear in the text over there, if you check it out over there. We we say it because there's a Chazal in Masechet Yoma that says it, but he claims that there's a pasuk, a few psukim over there in Zechariah, but there it says when someone claims he's a navi, his father and mother are going to stab him because it can't be because there's no nevuah, right? So there it says avihu, but it says before that udikaruhu avihu. So it has the who before avihu, udikaruhu avihu, right? V'chein b'divrei yomim aleph chavav v'yisimehu avihu v'yisimehu avihu. Right? So Reb Yaakov says it could be, it's just, in these cases, it's simply a lashon nofel al lashon. That's why they say it. Okay? Imkain Evshaloma shemishum ha'poal nokagam ha'poel. So because of the poal, meaning the udikaru v'yisimu, that's a verb. So they took Gampin the Poel. Who's the Poel? The Avihu, right? But Surzu. Avol Shar Chamesh Pamim, Uskru Beis Pamim, Gabi David, Ugimel Pamim, Gabi Manoach, right? There you don't have this answer. So Reb Yaakov wants to know, like, what do you do over here? You don't have this Lashon Nofel al Lashon. Now, I'm not dismissing that some could be because Lashon Nofel al Lashon. Others could be for a different reason, right? It doesn't have to be one reason. But Reb Yaakov does try to find all for one reason, but I'm not sure you have to. Some of them could be Lashon Nofel al Lashon, and some of them are not Lashon Nofel al Lashon. There's other reasons. Okay? So what are the places? If you look at 3:11, I mean, it says, "Vayishlach Hiram el Shlomo ki shama kol oto mashcho lemelech tachas avihu." Hiram, the king of Tyre and Sidon, right? Melech Tsar, right? He sent to Shlomo because David and him had a good treaty, because he heard that Shlomo was made the king tachas avihu. Okay, and then it also said Divrei Yomim Beis Gimel Vayachol Shlomo Livnos Bahara Maria Asher Nira LeDavid Avihu. It says, and Shlomo began to build on Har Moriah, which that's the Mokum HaMikdash. Here it says clearly Har Moriah. Asher Nira LeDavid Avihu. That Hashem appeared to David, his father, over here. According to Chazal, of course, he appeared to Avram there as well. LeDavid Avihu, David is with an extra yud over there, and Avihu instead of Aviv. Okay, that's the two places with regard to Shlomo. Okay, the Gimel Pamim Gabi Manoach, and then you have three with regard to Manoach. Efsha. Now here's Reb Yaakov taking a stab at different approaches to this issue. Some of them I like more, some of them I like less. The reason why we're learning this is not so much for that, even though I think it's a good thing to see that Reb Yaakov actually tries to figure out, the exceptions to the rule, which many times you have. You have also not avihu, achihu instead of achiv, right? So nobody, again, talks about these things. They just leave them. And they're really very, they're very enticing to talk about, So Rabbi Yaakov does do that on occasion. So he says like this, V'efsher ki kamo b'po'alim tzura zu, hi la'olam kisheniske kvar oso ha'po'ul, v'achar kach nishne, ki oz ha'kinui makom oso ha'nisker, kamo hallelujah Hashem, min hashamayim, hallelujah, right? Koloma oso ha'niskar, b'maromim, right? He says we find this type of usage in Tanach, where you have, you'll say something, hallelujah Hashem. Hashem is the subject here, right? And hallelujah is the verb, right? So you say Hallelu es Hashem, and the next time you don't say Hallelu es Hashem en Hashamayim or Hallelu es Hashem b'maromim. You say Hallelu. Now you just say, we praise him. They praise him, right? The who, the one, the Hashem we just mentioned, right? So that's where you get that little who. Okay? That in Tanach you see a lot. That the second time you don't say Hallelu es Hashem like in this case. Hallelu es Hashem and Hashemayim, Hallelu es Hashem b'maromim, Hallelu. You keep saying Hashem. You say Hallelu the second time, referring back to Hashem, and he says this in many places in the Tanakh. V'chein arbei v'imkei yesh lo markan ta'kosav siper she'af al pi she'ava ve'imo isnagdu b'tchila. Mikol makom acher kacha of aniskar ba'atzmo yord l'tapel b'inyanim nisuav. It's telling us that even though the father and mother were against the shidduch, right? Afterwards, the father himself went down. Once Shimshon wanted this, the father himself went down to be metapel with the matters of the marriage. So it already said the father, and therefore it said Avihu, right? Aviv, and then Avihu. The problem, of course, with this is Hallelu es Hashem, Hallelu b'maromim, whatever it is, right? That's right away in the same text. Here it's psukim later that this is. So I don't think that this is such a strong idea.
Rabbi Shurin, it's also it's not grammatically parallel at all. Like Hallelu is like a pronoun. It's a condensation. It might be instead of the word who, hey, vav, aleph. It's like a pronoun, and it would be, if you want to expand it, would be Hallelu oso.
Right.
Whereas aviv or avihu is a possessive, like whose father.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you're right. I feel it's a weak idea, and that's why he brings up, of course, other ideas as well. But I think even from the other side, you're right. But even from the simple pshat, I don't think you ever find something a who, except right after the verb, the original verb, hallelu, who, right? To say aviv, avihu, if it was like, you're right, it's not really the same to begin with, but it's not even in the same pasuk. It's like a couple of psukim before, so it's a little bit of a problem. And then he goes on to try to figure out the other ones as well. He says, V'achar kach kishaholach misham holach shuv el beis oto ha'av. He went back to oto ha'av. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, so what? So why can't you say aviv? He went back to oto ha'av. It's not. You're right. It's not the same way. It's not written the same way. V'chein acher mosov yerdu kol beis aviv. Right. The whole house of his father went down, right? So it says Beis Avihu, right? It's not. It's very weak in my opinion. But Reb Yaakov wrote it, so Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky put it in. But now Reb Yaakov goes on to say something else, which is a little bit better. Okay, but this is also not the reason I'm reading the article. The third pshat is off the tracks. Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. Gam efsher davihu nikra kishein la'av ze rak ben hazeh. They call avihu when there's only one child. Okay, that's when they use avihu. Ze alokan, right? But they don't always call him. Avihu. But if you have, he says, if you have one child, it could be avihu. V'chein gabi David efsher kishem molach shlomo. David didn't have any other children. I think he means that were Roy Lamalchus. And therefore, Shlomo was called, by Shlomo it says Avihu. Uvizcharia, Chidesh Hanovi, Sha'afal Pi Sheyia Ben Yochid Lahorav, Afal B'Kein Yidakruhu. In other words, the Chiddush by Zcharia is that even if it's Avihu and he only has one child, he'll also kill him. Ubedivrei Yomim, Ulachasa min b'nei Merari banim shimri harosh kilohaya b'char. That's what it says in the pasuk. Kilohaya b'char v'simeu aviu l'rosh. Right? It says that chasa from the children of Merari, right? That's the Leviim, right? Banim Shimri, the children, right? Olachasa ben b'nei Merari Banim Shimri Harosh. Now it doesn't say HaBachar because there was no Bachar there, so it calls him the Rosh. Kilohaya Bachar v'simeu aviu l'rosh. It says that in the text, actually. So it says there was no Bachar, so you can't call him Bachar, so you call him a Rosh. Hainu pnei shenoldu lo mitchila banos. Probably he wasn't a Bachar because he had sisters, no brothers. Ufikach k'shenolad b'no harishon sama l'rosh v'nimtza shayu so shah ben yochid la'aviv. Okay? So he says that sometimes, in other words, you see that when it's only one child, when the text wants to stress there was one child, right? With Shlomo, it's one child for the Malchus left. For the case in Zechariah, even one child they would kill if he claimed to be a Navi. And here, also, he was an only son. He wasn't the only child, but the only son at that time. And therefore, you call Avihu, and that's how you answer up all these things. Plus, of course, it would seem from the Pashup Pshat in the text that Manoach only had one child. Chazal say he had a sister too, but he certainly didn't have any more brothers, right? He had one child. Pashup Pshat says he had one child, and therefore he's called Avihu. But he's not always called Avihu. That's a little bit weak because it calls him Aviv also, right? Okay, so that is what Reb Yaakov says. One second. Yeah, that's the second shot of Reb Yaakov. Okay, let's go on. And this is the pshat that Mamish Reb Yaakov you read meha misilim here. He never does this, and all of a sudden he does it. Okay. Odef Shalomar Dehine Koswa Mekubalim. Okay? Reb Yaakov writes the Mekubalim right. Okay. The Shimshon Hoye Gilgul Nadav. Shimshon is the Gilgul of Nadav. Now, where did Reb Yaakov see this? Right? Take a look at 315 on the bottom, and you'll see. Balpeh Omar Rabbeinu Shamukubalim Ramzu Zeh, and Reb Yaakov saw it in the sefer called Seder Hadoros. Okay, the Seder Hadoros is a history book that was written from the time of Bereshis all the way till the late 1600s, and in there he doesn't only have history, but he goes into Gilgulim of different Tanoim, Amoraim, people in the Tanach, right? And that's based on Svarim that he read, okay? There's Svarim that deal with Gilgulim. Obviously, Gilgulim is not something, one of the Yud Gimel Mida, Yud Gimel Ikarim they have to believe, but they're even amongst the Rishonim, they already discuss it, right? But in the Sefer Seder Adoros, I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's a Sefer that was written in the early 1700s. He was living in the time of the Vilna Gaon, and his name was Yechiel Halperin, and he was the Rav of Minsk, which is the capital of Belarus. It was a big city, Minsk. He was the Rav of Minsk in the early 1700s, and he wrote this Sefer Seder Adoros. I had an old copy that got so old that I had to bury it, push it. It was falling apart. But you can get new editions today with Ha'oros and everything. I just never got a chance to buy it. But Reb Yaakov had an old edition, and that's where he used to find his Gilgulim. In fact, when he told me this pshat on Shimshon, he actually said to me, "Did you ever see the Seder Hadoros?" So I told him I've seen it, but I never really studied it. So he said, he was a Minsker. he was very proud because Reb Yaakov was from Minsk. So he says to me, "Du weißt, there's given a Minsker." You know, he was like very proud that this sefer came from the town where he grew up, the city he grew up. So that's what he said to me.
Did Reb Yaakov?
Yeah.
Did Reb Yaakov learn Sifrei Kabbalah per se?
So I never saw it, except the only thing I ever saw was the Shnei Luchos Habis, the Shloh. That's the only thing I ever saw him learn. He had it in the house, right? But I never saw him learn like Zohar or anything like that. And, you know, he probably read through the whole Seder Adoros because he was a Minsker, and he, you know, it's a history book also. It's not just Gilgulim. That's only 1/3 of the Sefer. The other third deals with a lot of other, you know, historical things. He even deals with non-Jews there. You know, he deals with Jesus. Okay, and when did Jesus live, and so on and so forth. And he has it like in order. It's like in order. It's not just like you know, different inyanim. He acts like a history book, and it goes all the way to the late 1600s, which is very interesting. Okay, now of course he brings all the Masorah, the Rabbanim, and all the, you know, the different Masorah. So he says, Bal Palmer Rabbeinu. Shamukubalim Ramzu Zeb Pasik, Vayishlach Hashem es Rubal, Vesbedon, Vesyiftach Veshmuel. That the Mekubalim bring a remiz to the Dava. Why? Because in Sefer Shmuel, when Shmuel talks about, rebukes the Jewish people for wanting a king, he says, you know that whenever you needed, God sent Shoftim. He sent Yerubal, which is Gidon, Bedan, which they say is Shimshon, and Yiftach, right? There's Shmuel. Talks about himself too. He says he sent Shmuel. Okay? So who's Bedan? Amru Chazal, Bedan says Shimshon. V'loma nikra Shmo Bedan, Da'asi Midan. Why was he called Bedan? Because he came from Dan, right? But it probably should have said, Ve'et Dan. What's Bidan? Umepnei shebedan who ofen muzar levate shabamidan. Rabbi Yosef says, this is what Rabbi Yaakov said, Balpeh. Okay? Rabbi Yosef just recorded it. Because it's a strange thing to put the bays there. L'chein amru sheyesh kan remez legilgul nadav she'os yosav hein bedan. Right? What is, if you read the letters backwards, right? Nun, Dalet, Beis. Nadav, right? So that's why it says, but Bedan, to tell you he is a Gilgal of Nadav. Now, the Sefer Seder Adoros goes into like how the fact that he was from that he was a Gilgal of Nadav, you know, what is as a Gilgal, what's Mechayev him? What is he obligated to do? So this is what Reb Yaakov goes into. Ulefisha nichnas shesuyi yayin, because Nadav went in when he drank wine, right? If you remember, the Chazal say that's why the parsha that Kohanim should not drink wine before the avoda comes right after the death of Nadav Avihu. And he went into the therefore he has to be a nazir min hayayin. This still I'm pretty sure the Seder Adoros says, because Rabbi Yaakov showed it to me inside. He didn't want to marry, right? It says that's one Chazal. Another Chazal says they didn't want to get married because they said, who's good enough for us? So he can only marry Goyim because he's a Gilgal, so he can't marry a Jew. Okay? He actually is very lengthy. Here comes Reb Yaakov out in the wild. Avihu. You have Nadav Avihu. So he says the father is Manoach was a nitzutz. He doesn't call it a Gilgal, but it's not exactly a Gilgal nitzutz, but he has a spark of Avihu. Okay, so here you have.
But that's not his original.
What?
That's not his original idea. He's taking that also from Sefer Adoros.
No, it's not there. You saw it there?
No, from what he's saying, isn't he's saying Al Dat Atzmo?
Yeah, Ufisa Yesh Lomar is him. I'm saying he's going wild.
Holy smokes!
Ulefikach hu akar. That's why he's an akar. The Masha pashta the Gemara, the Perik Mocher Sasfina. It's mashma in the Gemara over there that that he not only she was an akara, but he was an akar. That's what it's mashma in the Gemara there in a Mocher Sasfina in Baba Basra. So that's why it was an akar, because since Avihu never got married, so he couldn't have a child. She's an akara and she didn't give birth. I mean, if you're akara, you don't give birth. So he says, ayin radaksham, mepnei shlokim piri v'rivya. Right? Because he wasn't Makayim, period Varivya. So the Yoladet is going on. If you look at the note number 319, Ratzaloma, Shenenash Manoach Lios Akar, Mebli Efsharut L'Kayim Mitzvahs period Varivya, Ka'onesh Al Zesh Avihu, Lo Ratzal Seit Isha, L'Kayim Pruvu. Right? And so that's why he couldn't have children, because he's a nitzutz of Avihu, and Avihu didn't want to get married, therefore not have children. Like the Gemara in Yevamah says, Tanya Abachanim Mishum Rebbe Lozer Omer Kol Misha Osik Piri V'Riv Chayev Misa Shenema Vayomas Nodav Avihu Banim Lo Hayalahem. Right? Ha Hayalahem Banim Lo Mesu. The Gemara says, right? They died because they weren't Yosik and period Varivya. So therefore, as a Gilgal or a Nitzutz, he also couldn't have children. This is a beautiful idea. Wherever his mother is mentioned, he's called Aviv. But and this works out in the text. Wherever the father's alone, without mentioning the mother, it's Avihu. And therefore, why is it Avihu when the father's mentioned alone? Because he's not, when he's mentioned alone, it's Ki'ilu, he's single, so to speak, right? When he was not Eitzel Ishto, Rabbi Yosef writes, B'chinas HaNitza Shel Avihu, because he's not with his wife. So therefore, you call him here Avihu. So you have Nadav Vavihu, Ulefikach, Hutzrich Litpalel, Yavono Ode Leinu V'Yorenu, Mipnei Shahoru Ba'atzmam. The Gemara also says, the Gemara gives the Medrash Gemara gives many reasons why, right, they died. And one of the reasons the Gemara gives is because Horu Halacha Ba'atzmam, and they didn't ask Aaron and Moshe, right? That's the Gemara in Erevin, right? Rabbi Yosef has on the bottom. Lo mesu b'nei Aaron acha horu halachnu b'fnei Moshe Rabban. U'balpeh hosef Rabbeinu shezeh merumas b'tevis v'yoreinu. Right? What does it mean? The Avihu, or I should say Manoach, says, "Let the Malach come v'yoreinu b'fnei shahoru b'atzmam." He's doing a tikkun for Avihu, because they were Yoru Ba'atzmam, they were paskening by themselves. So he says, let him come v'yoreinu. That's like tikkun in the nitzutz of Avihu. Lefi shehema yu me'atzili b'nei Yisrael, vayechezu et Elokim vayochlu vayeshtu. Rashi brings over there that the Atzilei b'nei Yisrael were the Skenim and another Avihu. They saw God, right? And they ate and drank. So they were chayiv, Misa, Rashi says, but God didn't want to kill them because it was a time of simcha, so he killed them for later on. Because you don't experience a rendezvous with God and you're sitting and eating popcorn. It doesn't work, right? So Rashi over there at the end of Parshas Mishpatim says that they were really chayav misa because they were in a rendezvous with God. So here it says in our parsha, right? Amar, who he said, Manoach says, most no muskil kim ra'inu. We're going to die because we saw God. So you see that this is also a remez. He says that it's a remez that to Avihu, because they saw God and they didn't act towards God in a covetic way. So he says, most no muskil kim ra'inu. He's still that nitzutz. Seeing God meant to him that he's going to die. Why did it mean to him he's going to die? Because in the nitzutz, it was that Avihu saw God and then eventually he died. V'gam halav yatsa mipnei shenichshu be'esh. And it also says that when they brought the carbon, there was a lahav, I should say, and we know that they were nichshu be'esh, esh zara. They were makriv esh zara, right? So he says there is the remez to that as well, that a lahav had to come out, right, at the korban in order to, as a remez that there is over here, because they were sacrificing a korban and it was an eish zara. So lav yatsa in order to do a tikkun on what they did. V'gam yitochen lefikach koru lebeis avihu echav mipnei shavihu echav shel nadav haya. And now the last one, he adds something. The last time it says over there in the pasuk, it says after I told you after he dies, Shimshon, they go down to bring him up. Vayerdu echav v'chol beis avihu. Okay, vayisu oso vayalu vayikbru oso. Now, by the way, it's not clear who these echav are, because he certainly didn't have brothers. Because from the pashtus of the text, he didn't even have a sister. Chazal said he has a sister. The Gemara Bobash says he had a sister, but here it says Vayerdu echav v'chol beis avihu. So the pashup shot over here is echav are the Jewish people, like Moshe. Vayigdal Moshe vayetze el achav. Moshe grew up and he went out to his brothers. It doesn't mean they were all his brothers, They were, like, I don't know if you want to say lahavdil, but like the blacks in America. Hi, brother. Says to another black guy, brother. Not really his brother, but he's very close with him because they're both black, right? So that's why. Vayigdal Moshe vayetze el achav. So here it says, that's my shot at least. Okay? It says, Vayerdu echav v'chol beis avihu. The Jewish people went down, who now treated Shimshon like a brother, because before they isolated Shimshon, but now Vayerdu echav v'chol beis avihu vayisu also. So Reb Yaakov says over here something interesting. Reb Yaakov says, "V'gam yitoch levika kor lebeis avihu echav mepnei she'avihu achiv shel nadav haya." So why does he use the term echav here? They're not really his brothers. You should say bnei Yisrael, because they're being merames to that there were two brothers here, Nadav Avihu. So the house of Avihu brought down Nadav, and they call them Echav, the brothers. Mipnei Shaviu Achiv Shel Nadav Haya. Okay, that's the idea over here that Reb Yaakov is saying. There's another pshat he says over here that's very interesting. But before we get to the other pshat, you asked me about Reb Yaakov and Kabbalah. Okay, so when Reb Yaakov gave a share in Sefer Shoftim to a kollel in Monsey, okay, they brought up, they looked a little bit surprised at Reb Yaakov because they never heard Reb Yaakov talk about Kabbalah. So Reb Yaakov got off on a tangent here to answer up how he's allowed to talk about Kabbalah in the open and in front of everybody. Now that is number 314 on page Reish Nun Ches. Okay, it's a long footnote, which is very kedai. Okay, what does it say over here? It says, Bashir Sharabenu Masa Bebrisker Kolel. There was a Kolel Shel Brisk in Muncie. His beer, Shemarshel Atzmo Lefarish Barabim Al Pi Kabbalah. He allows himself to explain publicly Al Pi Kabbalah, Ulagalos Nistaros, and to reveal hidden things. Ki Bizman Hazeh Nishtanu Haitim. At this time, right, the times have changed. Okay, and he's going to go on to explain this. Okay, but the point over here is when Reb Yaakov gave this shir originally to the Balabatim in Muncie, he didn't bring this up. Okay, the thing that you saw so far is what Reb Yaakov actually wrote. On top is what Reb Yaakov actually wrote. I saw it in the Ksavim, and he told it to me. Right, he opened up the notebook and he told it to me. So that's what he has in the Ksavim. Okay. Here he didn't talk about it to his. I don't think he mentioned this whole Kabbalistic side to his Balabatim, but when he spoke to the Brisker Kolel, he mentioned this pshat, and therefore he had to explain why all of a sudden is Reb Yaakov talking Kabbalah in a public forum. Now today people speak Kabbalah, like it's going out of style. I mean, movie stars talk Kabbalah. It's like the in thing. But for Reb Yaakov, it was a big thing to talk about Kabbalah in a public forum. Even for brisker people, it was a big thing. So what does he say here? He says like this: Rabbeinu Hisber Inyan Shinui Hazmanim Begdem She'ela Madua B'Divrei Chazal Eina Muskar Shoshana Rabbah Uyom Hadin. So Reb Yaakov has an approach to why the Chazal never mention Hoshana Rabbah as a Yom Hadin. Okay, we know it as a Yom Hadin, meaning it's the Yom Hadin of the Kvitel, right, of the Petek, Pitka Tova, right? But in Chazal, it doesn't seem to be mentioned. Now, let me tell you the background to this, okay? There's a fellow that came to Reb Yaakov, and he said to Reb Yaakov, how could it be that it's a Yom Hadin when it's not mentioned in the Bavli and Yerushalmi? Okay? So Reb Yaakov actually told me who it was, and he says, I felt like the fellow was saying to me, a big Talmud Chacham, by the way, I felt like he's saying to me, it's not in the Bavli Yerushalmi, so why are we getting so hepped up about a Yom Hadin of Hoshana Rabbah, right? That he was sort of putting down, he was sort of critiquing, right?
It's not first in the Psukim that Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Hadin.
Right, that's also true. But it's in Chazal, big time. But here it's not even in Chazal, okay? Okay, there it says Yom HaZikaron, day of memory, right? So there's something there. Here there's nothing. So Reb Yaakov said like this to me. On the Bavli, I didn't have to believe him. Because he said it's not in the Bavli Yerushalmi, right? But in the Yerushalmi, I had to believe him. So Reb Yaakov was not, he learned through Yerushalmi, but he wasn't a Baki Yerushalmi. He didn't use the Chazer Yerushalmi, right? So he said, in Bavli, I didn't have to believe him. This is what he said to me. But in Yerushalmi, I had to believe him. Okay? Now, it turns out that Rav Zevin, Namoadim Ba'alocha, he was a Baki in Bavli, Yerushalmi, Safra, Sifri, caught everything, Rav Zevin. Okay? He actually found it in the Yerushalmi. Okay? He found a remez in the Yerushalmi, a remez. Okay? You can look there in Moadim Ba'alacha and you'll see he quotes that Yerushalmi as a remez. Okay? But in the Bavli, it definitely doesn't exist. And in the Yerushalmi, it's a remez, but it's there. Now, Reb Yaakov then asked this question, and what was his answer? Ve'ilu amukubalim harbe acharei chasimus hashas naslu pirsum le'in zebarabim. The Balei Kabbalah went crazy about Yom HaRava, Pitka Tova. They talk about it. And of course, the Zohar mentions it as well. And the question is, when did the Zohar actually get, written and so on and so forth, right? But the Bavli was probably written before the Zohar. And he says, what is it? The Balei Kabbalah go crazy about the Yom? If the Bavli didn't decide, didn't talk about it, why does Balei Kabbalah go so hepped up? Maybe it should also kept it secret, right? So Rabbi Yaakov told this to that guy, right? He told it to the guy, and then he wrote it down. It says in Gemara and Shabbos, right, in the Mishnayos there, in the first parak, that the Chazal will gozer on 18 things. One of the things was Asru Likro B'Shabbos L'Or HaNer Shemayata. One of the things was that you're not allowed to read on Shabbos by a candle, because maybe you'll move the candle by accident to make it lighter, to make it the light stronger, and then you'll be over on Avaras H. Ulachayra Kasha. The Maro Oz Ligzor Al Kach, Umasa Adas. Like, what happened before this and what happened now? Before this, it was good enough you could read by. And all of a sudden, one morning, we wake up. Next Shabbos, you can't read by a candle. Everybody comes out and says, you can't read by a candle next Shabbos. What's going on here? Venera, Dihine Biyom Kippur Mutter Likro or Amer, Mishum Amos Yom Adin Lo Chashin Shemayat. The Gemara, I don't think it's a Gemara, but it's definitely in Shulchan Aruch, that Shulchan Aruch says, but on Yom Adin, we're not afraid you're going to move it, because Amos of the Yom Adin. Okay? Imkei Nira, the Bedor Sholfnei Bei Shammai U Beis Hillel, Haya Amos Shabbos Kol Kach Ala Ish Ve'ish, Al Kol Ish Ve'ish, Shelo Choshu Shemayata. It must be that Shabbos was at one point such a great and awesome day. People understood how important Shabbos was, Kedusha Shabbos, so they didn't worry about you moving the candle just like on Yom Kippur. V'rach b'zmanim ro sha'ador nechlash ve'en alem od ema Shabbos. In the door of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, they already saw, probably over the generations, they're getting weaker and weaker, and they are not anymore, so scared or in awe of Shabbos. Kol kach v'shayach shemishu yateh. Next page. Amdu v'gazu shlo l'kro l'or haner. Therefore, Shabbos now took on a different din, because it wasn't like Yom Kippur anymore, even though, by the way, Shabbos moving the ner is worse than Yom Kippur. But that has nothing to do with the punishment, has nothing to do with the reality. Yom Kippur is once a year. People are very nervous about that. And therefore we don't worry about this. But by Shabbos, people got too easygoing about Shabbos. And more than once, the women asked me, they said, we heard that if you machal Shabbos, even if you do any malacha on Shabbos, right, of the 39 malachas, right, if you're mavashel on Shabbos, you're obligated to the death penalty. So the girls always ask me, how could it be? Just for cooking on Shabbos? Death penalty? You're going to kill somebody for cooking on Shabbos? They couldn't understand it. So I said, it's not that you don't understand about the cooking on Shabbos. You don't understand what Shabbos is, right? If we understood really what Shabbos is, we wouldn't have that question. But we're not really conscious and tuned into Kedusha Shabbos. If we were, we would understand it, right? That's really what Reb Yaakov is saying over here. It's not like a new Torah that Chazal wanted to torture us, so they made another Gzeira. Kamo nira the mashalohuva godol inyan shel Hoshana Rabbah b'shas at sheba mukubalim v'gilu lanu es hasod nira sheyadu Chazal shemipnei amos yom adin shel Hoshana Rabbah isbatlu mesimchas yontif. Chazal were afraid that if they would tell us the truth, that what do you call it? Hoshana Rabbah is a Yom Adin. People wouldn't have Simchas Yontif. It's on Sukkot. You have to have. It's a deraisa to have Simcha. Of course, they knew about it, but they weren't mafarsim it. V'rak misha yadas soda inyan yada. There were people who knew the sodos of the Torah. They knew it was. Avlachish adoris nechlashu. Kolkach ad she'ein amos adin shel Hoshana Rabbah mafriya l'simchas yontif badenu. We could have a good kvittel and have simchas yontif too. It's not a steer by us, right? Oz gilu atasod. Then they wanted us to be in awe more. So Megala the sod. That's what Reb Yaakov says over here, and therefore he ends off and says. V'lachein siyim Rabbeinu b'zmanenu shayach lilmod al pi Kabbalah v'adra l'fi chulshus hador k'dei lahaliv halavavos efshar v'efshar galos nistaros. He ended off by saying, because we're so weak in our connection to God, Kabbalah made us a new connection. Hasidus, Kabbalah gave us a new lahava to learn Torah and have an effect on us, and therefore we're allowed to learn here about the Gilgulim. Rabbi Yaakov gave himself a heter because the door really needs Kabbalah. So Rabbi Yaakov here is basically admitting that we have to learn certain things we didn't learn in previous Doros, even Kabbalah, Barabim, in order to make the people more excited about Torah, about Yadus. Okay, we'll stop here, guys. We'll take it up next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure.
Shekaya.
Thank you very much.
Sure. It's my pleasure.